This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Thank you so much, Carl. As you can imagine, when Secretary Kerry made that statement about he would do it all over again and major in religion, a number of my friends in the Guild lit me up on email. And one of them said he noticed that there was no funding attached to that statement. And so it was yet again another federally unfunded mandate. Perhaps someday we'll do better on that. Thank you, Carl, for that introduction. We go way back. We were just calculating. It was 30 years ago this year that I actually sojourned over here from Jackson, Mississippi. I was looking, frankly, for therapy, and Carl provided that for me. And we've had remarkable discussions in the intervening 30 years. So thank you so much. I've had a wonderful set of conversations here with students, faculty, and I'm eager to get the sort of Q&A going here because I'm eager to get your sense of these questions that we're looking at. This is a bit of a reunion for me. There are several people in the house besides Carl that I know. I met Liz Bounds over 10 years ago, which is kind of scary to think about. Liz was convening a cohort at the Wabash Center for Teaching and Learning in Religion, and I was part of that group. And it was really the first time I got to devote serious thought to pedagogy. And it created space to think about those issues. And for a sort of freshly minted professor, that's the last thing you're actually thinking about. It should be the first thing you're thinking about. And so that was really a transformative experience for me, and I learned so much from you, and I really appreciate our ongoing conversations. I also see Steve Krafchick here. Steve and I go further back. My wife actually knew Steve when she was in high school, and she actually babysat some of the kids. So I'm not going to put a number on how many years ago that was. But again, yeah, and I'm sorry you just said that. It's really, but Emory is the first major university campus I ever set foot on as a high school student. I came in the mid-'70s as a high school debater to the Barclay Forum, which I understand still goes on. Now, that's the weekend in January when it seems like there's this odd proliferation of bad suits, bad haircuts, and bad arguments for one weekend because all these high schoolers come in. And I came as a high school sophomore here. It was literally the first major research university I spent any time on, and I came three years in a row. Now, the reason I came is because Alban Barkley, for whom the Barclay Forum is named, is from my hometown in Paducah, Kentucky. So it was sort of a redneck affirmative action program. They invited my high school to come and be with all these other august high schools. Now, the reason I cite Barkley is he was Harry Truman's vice president, and he is best remembered for his exit from this mortal coil. He was speaking at Washington and Lee University after he retired as vice president, and he came to a point in his speech where he paraphrased Psalm 84. Now, some of you know that by heart, most of you probably don't, but he quoted, "I would rather be a servant in the house of the Lord than sit in the seats of the mighty." And he keeled over and died. And so the reputation around Paducah was God tested that thesis. So if his experience is a cautionary tale for people like me who tread the path between religion and politics, I'm not going to invoke Psalm 84, but I prefer the biblical phrase, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." So I'm going to try to remain humble in your presence. This university is unique for many, many things, but you are known, I think, rightfully in American higher education today because you have found a way to incorporate the study of religion into your academic DNA. You have a robust undergraduate program. You have a robust school of theology. You have a world-class graduate department of religion. And you like talking to each other across those silos. That makes you very, very unique in American higher education today. So I commend you for that. I think it's fitting then that as this first special advisor to the Secretary of State for faith-based and community initiatives, that Emory is the first place I come to talk about the nascent office and what we're trying to do. And the feedback I've already been getting has been extraordinarily helpful. I think there may be ways that my office can partner with the rich intellectual resources here, and I look forward to the ongoing relationship. Let me proceed in 4 steps. First, I want to say a few words about Secretary of State John Kerry and my relationship with him and how I ended up in this spot. Secondly, I want to outline the mission of the new office and tell you what we're trying to do. Thirdly, I will try to get very specific and concrete about some of the tasks we've been engaged in to give you a sense of kind of what my life is like and the sort of things we've been doing. And I want to conclude to say a few things about the work of training interpreters of religion. I am a religion academic by heart. In 3 years, I turn into a pumpkin. I go back to that world. So I'm constantly thinking out of the social milieu I've been working in and studying for a long, long time about how do we teach the skills of interpreting religion, and what am I thinking about in a new way because of this little 3.5 year interregnum. And I want to offer you really some very nascent, not fully formed ideas, and maybe we can spend time concentrating there. I met John Kerry in 2005 after he had lost his race for the presidency. And a mutual friend introduced us as he was Secretary Kerry, Senator Kerry. Forgive me, I'm gonna muddle that, but trying to toggle between the two titles. He was processing his loss and processing his future. And the friend said, I have this crazy assistant professor friend who's teaching here in D.C. who does religion and presidential politics, but also does religion and foreign policy, two areas that Senator Kerry was deeply concerned about. We come from very different social locations. To put it mildly, as my older sister says, we have a high poor white trash component in our DNA, all right? And I'm not going to explicate that, but I come from small town America, southern, rural. Both my parents were born on farms. Both my parents were the first to go to college on either side of the family. John Kerry, let's just say, has a different pedigree. It had a different pilgrimage. And so it was something of an odd relationship, but we instantly hit it off, and we had a number of conversations over the intervening 8 or 9 years about the power of lived religion as a political force in global politics. And unlike many of his peers in elective office, he has an intellectual curiosity. He reads, he talks, he changes his mind, and I've come to admire him in a way that is really, I think he's a quite remarkable public figure. And you fast forward to about a year ago exactly when he became Secretary of State. He learned that he had the legal authorization to launch this office. His staff called me. We had a very short conversation, and the next thing I knew, I had accepted the offer to come and to launch this office. So sometimes if you just mind your own business and you reply to emails, you get remarkable things that come to you. Now, what I noticed was when we first started talking, there were voices in the public realm who claimed that religion poisons everything. There were other voices in public life that said religion cures everything. And in our conversation, we both quickly realized neither one of these were true. That religion is a multivalent force in global politics. And neither simplistic lens really generates any light at all. It generates, in fact, a lot of heat. He was looking for light in that space, and that was really the basis of our conversation. I remember thinking at the time how unusual it was for a public figure to see the potential and the power of religious groups tackling things like extreme poverty, combating global climate change, fighting for human rights, and mitigating conflict and building peace. He saw the power of religion to do those positive things. At this time when other people were frankly confused about the public role of religion in Washington, D.C. And from that day forward, I admired his willingness to defy the conventional wisdom that dictated that religion was either a purely private choice, sort of a private consumer choice, not to be shared, or that communities that were animated by faith must be left entirely outside discussions of policy. He did not succumb to that temptation, which was rampant in Washington, D.C. A decade ago. So we have this very interesting relationship, and I was honored that he chose me to be the guy to help at least marginally improve religious engagement in his State Department. Now, why does he care, frankly, about religious engagement? And if you go back and read the speech that he made at my debut event, he talked a little bit about what he sees in terms of the price we pay for not doing religious engagement. And in essence, he said, if we overlook the religious dimension of so many of the geopolitical conflicts of our day, we do so at our peril. We don't have to look very far back in our history where literally people died as a result of our willful ignorance of lived religion in certain parts of the world where we engaged. And so we have this sense that we don't do religious engagement well, we've paid a high price. But that does not shed any light about what we ought to be doing in terms of religious engagement. It simply says the lack of it leads to disaster, but what do we do on the positive side when we actually try to do religious engagement? And that's what I'm going to begin to talk about this morning. Carrie then has this strong sense that this should be at the heart of what we do. Let me read a couple of lines from that speech. Religious engagement. The engagement that I'm talking about is a two-way street. Our job at the State Department is not just to proclaim or to stand up and pontificate about the things that we want. We want to listen to people about the things they want. And everybody here today has played a valuable role in promoting the development of countries or preventing conflict or advancing human dignity across the globe. So we launched this office with a clear intent to keep our door open and work as cooperatively as possible with all of you. Now, this was to a group of 125 people, many of whom had been planning under Secretary Clinton's tenure how to do religious engagement. And the State Department does not move quickly. We move slowly, kind of like an academic institution. We measure time in large, big chunks. We're not particularly nimble. So a lot of work had been done. He continued to say, so I say to my fellow State Department employees, all of them, wherever you are, I want to reinforce a simple message. I want you to go out and engage religious leaders in faith-based communities in our day-to-day work, build strong relationships with them, and listen to their insights, and understand the important contributions that they can make individually and that we can make together. And you will have the support of this department in doing so. So it's a very good thing when your boss shines a very bright light on your mission in front of the entire entity. And so I have been launched in a very powerful way by the Secretary, who gets at a very visceral level the need, if you will, to do religious engagement better than we have done it in the past. Now, it's interesting, when I landed at the State Department, one of the first things I discovered was there are a lot of people already doing religious engagement. There are a number of offices and bureaus that do this kind of work. And let me just read to you some of these positions. We have an ambassador at large for international religious freedom. At this point, we're searching for a new nominee. I think very shortly we're going to have a spectacular nominee. But since 1998, we've had this ambassadorship, and we have an Office of International Religious Freedom that does an annual global report on the state of religious freedom around the world. It's a big office. It does remarkable research, and it's actually available online. You can read the assessment of all 180 or 90 countries in terms of their stance on international religious freedom, and that office has been there now for over 15 years. In addition, we have a special envoy to the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and the envoy's name is Rashad Hussain. He's a brilliant lawyer from Dallas, Texas, and he has brought to that new position an ability to engage a wide range of countries that are members of the OIC. We have a special envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism, that is Ira Foreman. We also have a special representative to Muslim communities, and that position is actually open at this point. We're seeking a replacement for that. We have many leaders in our regional and functional bureaus, and of course we have officers serving at over 200 posts around the world. So the point is that my office is not created or designed to create a new silo or ghetto where all the religious people can be sequestered on the side where we can't do any damage. It is in fact to help empower religious engagement across this vast bureaucracy. You think about some of the large other bureaus that deal with religion. There's the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. We will resettle 70,000 people in the United States in 2014. That's the statutory mandate. And after 2011, that number dropped very, very low. And last year was the first year since 9/11 that we've hit that 70,000 mark. We're going to hit it again in 2014. What happens is that when you apply for refugee status and you're approved and you come to the States, there are contracting agencies that we contract with who will take care of you for the first 90 days in the United States. And now there's an office at Health and Human Services that helps you after the 90 days. But that's another part of the bureaucracy. But I think we have 12 contracting agencies which manage that 90-day transition period. 9 of the 12 contracting agencies are faith-based groups. And they sign a non-proselytizing agreement. They're not there to pick off refugees and convert them into something else. But this is an ongoing relationship to the State Department because we found that faith-based groups actually are very good at doing this. And so we're up to 70,000 people a year, up from the nadir back in 2011. We also have a relatively new bureau, the Trafficking in Human Persons Office, which puts out an annual report. And again, faith-based groups are really at the cutting edge of combating the global trafficking of human beings. And this office, the JTIP office as it's called, has an amazing capacity to interact with the faith-based groups here in the United States that are trying to combat that. And then we also have the Office of the Global AIDS Coordinator, which is the entity that has funded all of our anti-AIDS and HIV work in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia and other places. They, too, contract with a multiplicity of faith-based groups in distributing aid in the fight against the AIDS pandemic. So the State Department has an astonishing array of capacity to engage in religious actors. The launching of my office, I hope, provides some unity and some synergy across that to raise our capacity. So my hope is that by the end of this administration, when I turn back into a pumpkin and go back to the pleasures of the academic life, that people may see this administration in its work on elevating religious engagement as something analogous to what President Carter did back in his presidency, where human rights became centralized in our foreign policy such that it could not be undone by any succeeding presidency. So that's my modest hope and aspiration, that if we do this work right, the wisdom of doing it right will be self-evident to any administration going forward. Let me talk now about what I call the threefold mission of the office. The first mission I have is to advise the Secretary on religion when it cuts across his portfolio. And if you open up any major national newspaper and look at what he's dealing with, religion seems to cut across every blooming issue that he's dealing with. And I won't bore you with that list, but let me just assure you it's true. So the daunting part about trying to advise him is I've often told people, when it comes to religious engagement in foreign policy, there are no experts, there are only students. And certainly there's no one person who can pretend to be the expert on religion, because in these different contexts, religion is a completely different force. So there's no general theory of religion that applies and sheds light in all of these contexts. But I'm quick to say, as a member of the American Academy of Religion, I'm 3 phone calls away from the world's best experts on religion. Because if there's a form of lived religion, somebody in our guild studies it. So part of my work is networking and trying to reach out to experts to say, get us smarter on religion in this context or that context. So very much managing relationships and reaching out is at the heart of what we're trying to do, because I want to make sure the Secretary has the best information he can have as he's looking at the religious dynamic of all these complex issues that he's looking at. The second mission, and this one tracks more with my training as a religion scholar, is to try to increase the capacity for religious engagement in the State Department. There are a lot of people who do religious engagement well. I've outlined some of the specific offices. But at the embassy level, what I've discovered is you may get an ambassador who's really smart on religion, and you may get some staff there who are smart, and so you may develop a really good capacity, but you go 2 personnel cycles, and it evaporates, it disappears. And they may be replaced with people who know nothing about religion. They may have no desire to learn about religion in the civil society where they work. We've got to find a way to institutionalize religious engagement so that it's part of the routine analysis that we do about the civil society of a particular embassy. Now, I'm really quite excited about some tools I serendipitously inherited when I arrived. About 1.5 years ago, President Obama asked his national security staff for a strategy for integrating religious leader and faith community engagement into U.S. foreign policy. And the national security staff convened an interagency process to come up with a strategy. They finished this strategy the week before I was hired. So you're always a little anxious as the new guy, and you come from a world where you grade papers and you critique in the margins with red ink, and here's this document that comes from the White House. The good news is it's a good document. And that's really good, because they're not going to appreciate red ink from me going back up to the White House. But one of the things this strategy calls for is that we go into the field and study in a few countries what kind of religious engagement has in fact been effective, and what might we ought to be doing in addition to the sort of ad hoc evidence that we're going to find. And once we're done with that, we're going to look at best practices, we're going to look at lessons learned, we're going to go and try to reform our training curriculum at the Foreign Service Institute, which is the internal pedagogical engine, if you will, in the State Department. So I'm eager as an academic to think we might actually be able to tweak the DNA so that asking questions at the embassy level about what is the role, what's the political role of lived religion in different countries, and developing relationships with those religious communities, that may help us be more effective in times of crisis. They may help us be more effective in times of stability going forward. And that may be something I can leave behind that will continue to pay dividends after my 3 short years have evaporated. So we have a mandate from the White House to get smarter on this. It's going to be research-based, and we're going to try to come up with pedagogy that fits into the required curriculum so that in the apparatus going forward, we have this bandwidth, we have this expertise, and frankly, I hope I can leverage the external academic guild to help us continue to remain smarter or get smarter, particularly at the regional and local level. So I have high aspirations and high hopes that we, based on this strategy, will be able to increase our capacity. The third job, or third mission I have, is to be a point of contact for external religious groups. The State Department's a huge building. I've been there 7 months almost, and I'm still bewildered by its structure, its organization, and every time I think I've mastered it, I have an experience where it makes me realize I don't understand the building. Imagine being an external NGO that works in Burma, mitigating conflict between Muslims and Buddhists, that wants to find out who in the State Department does that well. They have no idea who to call. The directory has thousands of entries in it. I want to develop a capacity where that organization can come to us and say, who in this building should we partner with? Who can we share information with? Who can help us get smarter? I want to be able to be the traffic cop, sort of the customer service window, telling you where you can partner in the building. But it means I've got to have staffers who know the building, because I'm never going to learn the building in 3 years. In the first 6 months, we have met with over 300 external groups. I stopped counting at 300 because I kept thinking, all right, this is just an initial tide. It's going to taper off this week. Oh, no. Next week, it's going to taper off. Well, guess what? Now people are circling back after the meet and greet, and they have letters. Can you give this to the president? Do you know this is going on in South Sudan? Do you know that this is going on in Central African Republic? And so we're now establishing relationships where people are coming back. Now, in this slice of 300-plus groups is an extraordinary pluralism. One of the anxieties about the office in the hearts and minds of a number of academics, religious academics, was that somehow we would be biased towards certain groups and biased against certain groups. And that's certainly a legitimate question to ask. Who do you see and who do you not see? But we've made a commitment to radical inclusion. We have said no to no one who's come and knocked on our door and wanted to meet with us. Now, let me just take my word for it. That range of 300 groups is astonishing. It goes from the political right to the political left. It represents all the world's great religions and some of the not-so-great religions. I've met with communities I did not know existed, but who came and have educated me and made me smarter. But that radical inclusivity has to be at the heart of what we do. It would be wrong of us to turn folks away because somehow they don't fit in some dominant cultural paradigm that many of us are used to. I also have to build a staff that has the capacity to receive this kind of diversity and have far better skills than I do in some of these communities. But we have that deep commitment, and the gratifying thing to discover is those communities are eager to come and tell us their stories. They're eager to come and find ways that we can partner together and make each other smarter. And so that third mission is really quite huge. So those are the 3 major missions: advising the Secretary, building capacity for religious engagement, and then being the portal, if you will, for other groups to come in and learn what we do and also tell us what they do so that we can be mutually smarter as a result of that. So what kind of actually, let me tell you a little bit more about the national strategy. Let me read from you what we're trying to do here. And this is language from the executive summary of the strategy. Number one, we want to promote sustainable development and more effective humanitarian assistance. Religious leaders and faith-based organizations often serve as gatekeepers and decision makers at the community level and oversee development efforts in their communities. By working in partnership with religious actors and ensuring the development programs are mindful of religious contexts, U.S. foreign assistance efforts will become more effective and sustainable. Number two, we seek to advance pluralism and human rights, including the protection of religious freedom. Our engagements with religious actors should continue to advance universal human rights, including religious freedom, while promoting tolerance, pluralism, and respect for human rights of members of minority or marginalized groups, especially women and girls, but also individuals that are marginalized or persecuted for reasons such as their beliefs, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation. Building on our current initiatives, we will increase our efforts and engage in a diverse spectrum of religious leaders and institutions, including those whose views differ from our own, while being sensitive and respectful of their beliefs and traditions. And thirdly, to prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflict and contribute to local and regional stability and security. In its efforts to break the cycles of violent conflict and mitigate crises, the U.S. government will work with religious leaders to address both religious and non-religious causes of violence and to support community resilience. This includes initiatives to counter violent and extremism. I won't bore you with the remaining 20 pages of the strategy, but you get a sense and a flavor of what we're hoping to do there. What concrete issues am I working on? Now, I'm not going to give you a full laundry list, but let me highlight three potential issues here, and depending on how much time we have, I may cut this short. The first task Secretary Kerry gave me was to promote awareness of the Disabilities Treaty, otherwise known as the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. I confess I knew nothing about the Disabilities Treaty when I took this job. It was negotiated at the United Nations by George W. Bush in 2006. It was signed by President Barack Obama in 2009. And the United States Senate is now trying to have the vote to ratify this treaty, which requires a 2/3 vote or 67 votes in the United States Senate. What I've been asked to do is to raise awareness of the treaty itself, particularly in faith communities, because this is an issue that, frankly, faith communities ought to have some natural affinity for. But if you're like me, I thought I knew. I read the Washington Post every day, right? So I'm a highly educated citizen. I knew nothing about this treaty, even though I try to convince myself I pay attention. So if that's true in Washington, my hunch is most of you have heard blessed little about the Disabilities Treaty or the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. There are a set of guiding principles, and essentially what this legislation does, what this treaty will do, is it takes the sort of heart and soul of the American with Disabilities Act, which was passed in the 1990s, and elevates it into an international agreement. So it takes the standards which we have observed and implemented in our country now for over 20 years and tries to get the signatory countries to agree to observe those same standards about human rights, accessibility, non-discrimination, which we are now still struggling to implement, but which we have made great progress in the last 2 decades. I think 136 countries have now ratified the treaty. The United States has not ratified that treaty, even though it is designed on American legislation, and it was American leadership that helped promulgate it and design it in the UN itself. So here are the basic principles at stake. The convention calls for respect for inherent dignity, individual autonomy, including the freedom to make one's own choices, and independence of persons. It seeks the principle of non-discrimination. It argues for full and effective participation and inclusion in society. It calls for respect for difference and acceptance of persons with disabilities as part of human diversity and humanity. It calls for equality of opportunity, accessibility, equality between men and women, and respect for the evolving capacities of children with disabilities, and respect for the right of children with disabilities to preserve their identities. I would argue those are all morally and politically defensible human rights. But in far too many parts of the world, they do not obtain. People with disabilities do not enjoy those rights. So this treaty will help elevate those rights. It will set up a mechanism to evaluate the performance of countries going forward, and to, in cases of non-compliance, advocate that indeed they bring up national legislation and behavior to meet the standards of the treaty itself. I have spent a lot of time touring the country with Judy Heumann, who is a legend in the disability community. She is our special advisor for international disability rights, and a truly remarkable human being. So we do the Shaun and Judy Road Show. We've done a fair amount of, in fact, she was going to come back in the first trip here. She was going to actually come with me and hope to be a part of this. I simply commend this to you. If you are, in fact, a part of a faith community, take a look at what the treaty will do. Now, you've got a deep and rich history here at Emory, at Candler, at looking at disability issues in religion. So this is a place where you should take up an examination not only of the treaty, but the issue itself, because it fits so nicely with your history here and the capacity you've had in your faculty in the past. So this is the kind of thing where I'm eager to come in, shine a bright light on an issue that frankly not enough of us know about, but call you to look and see what you might do in terms of supporting the ratification of this treaty. The second issue, in a sense perhaps more dramatic and one that you know more about, is that of the Middle East peace process. As you may know, or you may not know, we are actively engaged in negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians on the Middle East peace process. One of the things I'm actually gratified that my office has been called in to support the Special Envoy's office that's actually doing the negotiation. And the Special Envoy is Martin Indyk, a name you may know if you know anything of the history of our negotiations in the past. And one of the things that Indyk has perceived is that in the past, we were concerned about the people at the table and less concerned about global constituencies around that. So that when the leaders are making the very difficult decisions they're going to have to make if we get to a final status agreement, when they look up and over one another's shoulders, we have not built a global coalition around them telling them, please, continue to the hard part, continue through the hard part, and we will be with you in the much more difficult work of implementation. And so Martin said we need to do global outreach, and we also need to do global faith outreach as a part of this. So I'm deeply overjoyed that part of what my office is doing is supporting that process and building global religious outreach around it. So we're doing some Christian-specific work, other offices are doing Jewish and Muslim-specific work, and we're all doing interfaith work together, because this is the one space where religious leaders can produce the hope that will sustain the political energy in community to get us to the finish line if, in fact, we ever make it there. So we're doing a number of things. I won't drill down too far into the details. I was going to read some excerpts from Carey and Martin Indyk. I'm not going to do that because I'm going too long. We're running out of time. But there really is, when you talk, at least when I talk to Americans, particularly American Christians, first of all, a lot of people don't know the conversation's even going on. Secondly, to the extent they know what's going on, the question is why? Why is this time going to be any different from the decades in the past? Now, there are a number of good answers to that. I'll give you one. What's different is the political actors at the table are a new set, and they all actually exist in different political contexts than even a few years ago. So we have Secretary Kerry bringing extraordinary energy and focus to this set of issues. We have Martin Indyk, who probably is as smarter than anybody else in this space. He's written a wonderful book in 2009, Innocence Abroad, about the history of the peace process and his participation in it. But we also have Mr. Abbas and Mr. Netanyahu, who perhaps for the first time in that space have the political will to make the hard decisions to bring change to bear there. The issues have not changed. We know what the issues are. We're trying to find sort of a zone of agreement, and we're looking for an interim agreement where we can sort of begin to circle around what the range of options are on the big issues. And I just simply say watch the news. Stay tuned. There may be good news about this agreement, the agreed framework, as they're calling it. But I ask you, as a community of inquiry, a community of study, and many of you are also deeply connected to communities of faith, there's fatigue on this issue in the American public. There is cynicism on this issue. And it's not irrational. I know the history. I know the vexations. But if I can prod you, do what you do. You deliberate. You think. You bring people together. And this is, let's be honest, this is a hard conversation to have, particularly in an interfaith environment. But we need to have it, and institutions like yours need to be leaders in creating the safe space to have these hard, difficult questions. And part of my job is to exhort you to do what you are called to do. State Department can't do that for you. I can't come in and create those conversations. I can do the sort of homiletical thing and wave the finger at you and beg you to do it, and that's what I'm doing today. And I'm pleased that part of what I'm doing in our office is trying to create interfaith space. A week and a half ago, we had an interfaith dinner at Georgetown University. It was off the record, where Secretary came in, and we had 15 national Muslim leaders, 15 national Christian leaders, 15 national Jewish leaders. Now, my experience of interfaith conversations in Washington, D.C. is complicated. I've been in interfaith meetings where you would walk in and there would be this vast open space in the middle. And there would be all the Christians over there. And there would be all the Muslims over there. And there would be all the Jews over there. And then there would be the poor sap convener in the middle trying to get people to talk to each other. This was a remarkably different event. We arranged the seats. I just said, trust me on this. We have name cards. So we shuffled the deck. But out of that conversation came expressions of hope. We had people saying for the first time, after listening to Secretary Kerry, they actually had more hope for a final status agreement than they had had in years. So that's the kind of catalytic interfaith work we're trying to do, is create these spaces. And the questions were hard. This wasn't just kumbaya, oh, it's really good to sit and have bagels with you today. There were hard, tough questions posed to the Secretary from all three communities about why should we care and why is this time any different. So I am hopeful. I don't traffic in terms of optimism or pessimism about the process, but again, I urge you to try and generate a conversation here, try to find ways that you can generate support for the ongoing process and discussion. I was going to talk a little bit about the Vatican Experience. Let me just very briefly summarize some of that, but I'm going to kind of cut it short. I was with Secretary Kerry a few weeks ago when he made his visit to the Vatican and met his counterpart, Archbishop Pietro Parolin, the new Secretary of State in the Vatican. This was the day after Pope Francis had given his first foreign policy speech to the assembled Vatican diplomatic corps. The Pope does this every January. This was Francis's first January, so this was his first speech. And I told the Secretary on the plane as we were flying into Rome, I said, I've read this speech. And with a little creative editing, this could have been your speech. Because we're at this really interesting moment where about 75% of the Vatican's foreign policy wishes overlap with 75% of our foreign policy wishes. The list includes global climate change, addressing extreme poverty, preserving religious freedom, Middle East peace, a peaceful resolution in Syria, stopping human trafficking. And it was a remarkable conversation between the two Secretaries of State, where they found ways that perhaps we can work together to advance on all of these issues. And Secretary Kerry is eager to build on that relationship because of the positive things we see and hear coming from this Pope. If you read Pope Francis's 50,000-word exhortation, my daughter thinks my exhortations are that long, Evangelii Gaudium, the joy of the gospel, you see three themes. It's reform of the church. It is recovering the preferential option for the poor and putting it at the center of the church's life. And it's calling for dialogue. Dialogue within the church, dialogue within civil society, dialogue between the religions of the world. And I think there are ways that this Pope is going to be able to change the world in the Middle East and in other places. And so we're looking for ways that we can partner with him going forward. The President himself is going over on March 27th. So I hope the engagement continues and grows. So let me conclude at this point, and then we'll open it up for questions. The last thing I want to talk about is this notion of where will the interpreters of religion come from going forward? Who are our best interpreters of religion in the future? How are they going to acquire the requisite skills to be sophisticated interpreters of religion in our society, not only just within the government, but within the whole society? Let me make 4 quick comments. I think, first of all, the training of students has to be an interdisciplinary exercise. Sometimes as religion scholars, we self-ghettoize ourselves, if I can use that language. We pull out of conversations with other disciplines. We assume we know more than anybody else possibly could, so why should we deign to engage with other academic departments? I think that's politically dangerous and naive, and there are a lot of religious studies departments that have been shut down in recent decades because we have not played the collaborative political games well in our own larger university and college institutions. That's sort of the self-preservation argument, but the better argument is to say that to truly understand religion requires an interdisciplinary approach. And so you have got the building blocks to continue doing that here at Emory, so I commend you for that. Don't give that up, because you can be a model. In the liberal arts college ought to be a place where a student can pick up a wide range of interpretive skills. Secondly, in terms of religious engagement, from where I sit, I think we're going to have to be theoretically modest. And again, that doesn't come naturally to religion scholars. We fight about method, we fight about religious studies versus theological studies, and we think my answer is the right answer, and we spend a lot of time fighting with each other. And frankly, nobody outside of our discipline cares about that. They really don't. But going forward, in terms of the governments doing religious engagement, let me simply say the State Department is not a graduate religious seminar. And this is from somebody who spends a lot of time in graduate religious seminars, and I've burned a lot of hours. I love it. But that's not what the State Department's about. The planet is on fire when I go to work every day. There is conflict. There is suffering. There are human rights violations proliferating around the world. We're looking for ways to try to change that. People have no time for 6 months' worth of seminars first before we do engagement. We are often far more responsive in the moment. I think we have to be experimental and pragmatic, but we also have to be self-aware about our own methodological decisions. So it's a fine line that we have to walk. Thirdly, when we do religious engagement by the government, we have to acknowledge that the government actually does have interests. It's not done in a vacuum. I get up every day, I go to a building with 4,000 colleagues, and the 3 main things we're trying to do are fight extreme poverty, promote human rights across religious freedom, LGBT rights, disability rights, rights of women and girls, the list goes on. And we're trying to build peace and mitigate conflict. That's not a bad set of topics to wrestle with in your professional career. We are not perfect. We are not as sophisticated as we need to be. But it is not disinterested religious engagement. It is in the context of our foreign policy. And I am comfortable promoting this set of interests. Lastly, I want to challenge you. As I've said several times here, you are a place that's known for training people across the disciplines in religious studies. You have, if I can use this language, a leadership role in American higher education. Because this is not the norm in religion in American higher education today. This is your capacity, and I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm sure there are tensions here across the silos. But you model in a way I'm hard-pressed to think of any other analogous institution having made peace. You talk to each other. I mean, I've sat now in several dinners and lunches where religious studies professors talk to School of Theology professors. and you can't tell at the end of the day which are which. And so you have a collegiality and you have an ease of engagement, and there are a range of other scholars who are not religion scholars per se who are at these tables. You need to find a way to shine a bright light on what you do, because American higher education is going the other way, I think, with respect to religion. It's declining, it's evaporating, and the interdisciplinary part of it. And so the irony is, the rest of the world's discovering the public power of religion. They're knocking on doors of religion departments, and too many times they're finding nobody at home. Or they're finding scholars with the shades pulled down and the lights turned off who don't want to answer that door. That's not where you are. So let me simply leave you with the admonition to continue doing what you're doing, but find a way to tell the rest of the world you have an interesting model here, you have an interesting history here, and that can pay huge dividends both for society, but also for the guild of religion broadly drawn. Thank you very much.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.